Psalm 16, 8-11. I have set the Lord continually before me. Because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. Therefore, my heart is glad, and my glory rejoices. My flesh also will dwell securely. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to undergo decay. You will make known to me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand there are pleasures forever.
Hi and welcome to Israel Update. We are starting a brand new series with you all about the Messiah. This is going to be called Messianic Prophecies, and today is going to be teaching one out of what will probably end up being a pretty long series, looking at the prophecy in the Old Testament, pointing to the fact that Jesus is indeed the Messiah that all of the prophets of old were pointing to, and that he is indeed the one. And so I'm inviting you to open your heart as we journey on this together. And so we're going to be starting this entire new series with the first prophecy, which is that the Messiah would be resurrected. Now in Psalm 16, 8-11, this is the Old Testament prophecy that we're looking at, and it says this: I have set the Lord continually before me. Because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad, and my glory rejoices. My flesh also will dwell securely, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to undergo decay. You will make known to me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand there are pleasures forever. Now that was the Old Testament prophecy pointing to the fact that Jesus, the Holy One, would not undergo decay, meaning he would conquer death. Now the New Testament fulfillment, we see this in Acts 2:22-32, and it says this: Men of Israel, listen to these words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs which God performed through him in your midst. Just so you yourselves know, this man, delivered over by the predetermined plan and knowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. But God raised him up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power. Speaking of Jesus, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power, speaking about how Jesus cannot and could not be held down by death. For David says of him, and he goes on then to quote about the Psalm 16, 8-11. And then he continues, Brethren, I may confidently say to you regarding the patriarch David that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. And so, because he was a prophet and knew that God had sworn to him with an oath to seat one of his descendants on the throne, he looked ahead and spoke of the resurrection of Christ, that he was neither abandoned to Hades or Sheol, nor did his flesh suffer decay. This Jesus raised up again, to which we are all witnesses. And then there's further fulfillment again in Acts 13, 35-37, again repeating the psalm, pointing to the fact that this was speaking of Jesus. Now, King David may have seen ahead to his own resurrection, but David's resurrection was only possible because of the resurrection of his descendant, the Messiah. His vision of his own resurrection and that of the Messiah's could well have blended into one glimpse of the future. But in Acts chapter 13, Paul says that David did see, that is, experience, the corruption of death, because after all, he did die. His tomb is there, as they were saying. It's there, you can go visit it. Even today when you're in Israel, you can go see King David's tomb. But in his own descendant, the Messiah Jesus, that corruption was not seen. As Paul taught elsewhere, because of Jesus' resurrection, the resurrection of all other believers is possible. So we're now looking at how Jesus is indeed the Messiah. Imagine looking up a friend by first locating his country. That would definitely not be enough information. So you'd need to ascertain his city, his street, and specific street number. It would also be helpful if you knew a phone number, a home phone number, and when he would be home. Now, similarly, the Bible tells us the ID, the identification of the Messiah, his ethnic background, his place of birth, the time frame of his arrival, and other identifying characteristics are given to us in the scriptures. These credentials are able to identify to us that Jesus is indeed the Messiah, and in order for us to recognize imposters. So now we're going to look, what are some of the credentials of the Messiah? Now we're going to be examining all of this in a lot more detail as time goes on, as we continue on with the series of Messianic Prophecies. But I think it's so important for us to be able to give an answer. How do you know that Jesus is the Messiah? Well, we're looking through the Old Testament, we're looking to the New Testament fulfillment, and it is so important for us to be biblically literate, for us to understand and know, not just some vague sort of, oh yeah, I think it said that in the Bible, but for us to actually know for ourselves what it is that the Word says, so that, like we were taught in Scripture, we need to be able to know how to answer every man. So we're only going to look at a couple of credentials of the Messiah today, because of the sake of time, because I'm on a mission to make sure that these teachings are kept short enough for you to watch in, a little lunch break or whatever it is that you're doing, and know that we'll be able to dig into this in more depth as time goes on. But firstly, Messiah was to be born at Bethlehem. Micah chapter 5, 1 and 2 tells us that Messiah would be born from the tribe of Judah. Genesis 49:10 tells us that Messiah would present himself by riding on a donkey. We read of that in Zechariah 9:9. That Messiah would be tortured to death. We read of this entire account in Psalm 22. That Messiah would arrive before the destruction of the Second Temple. We're told this in Daniel chapter 9 from verse 24 to 27. That Messiah's life would match a particular description, including suffering, silence at his arrest and trial, death and burial in a rich man's tomb, and resurrection. We see this from Isaiah chapter 52 verses 13 to Isaiah chapter 53 verse 12. All of this is foretold, it's laid out, it's explained to us to say, these are the signs that are pointing towards the fact that he is indeed Messiah. This is what the Messiah will look like. In regard to lineage, birthplace, time, and lifestyle, Jesus matched the messianic expectations of the Hebrew scriptures. Now again, each of these elements we're going to examine in detail. How he was indeed born at Bethlehem, how he's from the tribe of David. We'll look back at the genealogies and see how he is who the scriptures have said that he is. The record of this fulfillment, as told in the Hebrew scriptures in the Old Testament, what we would call the Old Testament today, the record of this fulfillment is to be found in the pages of the New Testament. But there are several other factors combined to further substantiate the messiahship of Jesus. In the first place, Jesus, claimed to be the Messiah. We read of the story in John 4 with the famous account of the woman at the well, which is often used as a passage to teach us on true worship. The woman says to him, I know the Messiah is coming. And he replied, I am he. I who you speak to am he. This is found in John 4:25 to 26. Now, of course, you can't use that just as a way to say, oh, well, that's the proof by itself. But because also this is something I just need to point out. If somebody is completely intent on disbelieving, there's nothing you can do to force them to believe. But if somebody has an open mind and is prepared to look objectively and say, okay, these are the claims that were laid throughout the Old Testament scriptures saying that this is what Messiah would look like, you cannot for a second with even the slightest objectivity deny that Jesus is indeed the Messiah that the Old Testament prophets spoke about. His own claim laid the groundwork for the rest of the evidence. He said it. I am he who speaks to you. I am that Messiah. He does. And I think that for anybody who's experienced Jesus in any way, shape, or form, you would know that he transforms people's lives. It's what he does. Because he provides atonement for sin and reconciliation with God, Jesus brings peace, joy, and purpose into people's lives. Apart from faith in him, there is no basis for true peace or direction, for as the psalmist says, man is estranged from the womb. That this estrangement is healed by the reconciling ministry of Jesus is the common experience of those who believe in him. And so between the objective evidence gathered in Hebrew scripture and the New Testament, the fulfillments laid out in the New Testament, and then of course the verification in our own lives, it is obvious and evident that Jesus is who he claims to be. Now, this is just the beginning. This is just the start. The first prophecy, as we saw in Psalm 16, that the Messiah would be resurrected. As you read through the scriptures and even as confirmed in Acts, there were witnesses to the fact that he was resurrected, and that is just the very first prophecy that we're looking at to prove that Jesus is the Messiah. Now, we're going to keep going. Next week, I'm going to be teaching about how the Messiah would bring in a new covenant. So let me encourage you, make sure you're tuning in every Friday. We have a new show for you on IsraelUpdate.org. Make sure you follow us on Facebook. We are the Israel Update channel, because we're always bringing you breaking news and updates that are coming out of Israel. And our mission, our focus, our goal is to bring you biblical truth, biblical teaching with relevant breaking news coming straight out of the ground in Israel. And we're so blessed to have Doobie there and able to provide that information for us. So again, make sure every Friday you tune in. There's a new show for you every single week, and we are going to be examining Messianic prophecies and how Jesus is indeed the Messiah. God bless you this week.
Israel Update is brought to you by the generous supporters of the Israel Partnership. Because of their love for Israel, we are able to bring you this show and continue to sow into the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. For more information on how to become a sustaining partner, please click the Israel Partner banner below.